when you didn't feel like you had the hangover of the century.
That's true. My older kids already had their punch card. They already had their free Subway sandwich with the punch card for protests.
They have more. They have
Yeah,
enough punch cards to share with their friends. I
yeah.
remember. I remember Sumahi when she was just a nenny. Even
Oh
and
yeah.
I remember my son used to play with Kara's daughter when we were doing meetings late at night. Kara's daughter was Haani. I love you, Haani. You was our like designated babysitter. Even Sumaya to be like babysitting duty from time to time. But very exciting. I'm happy to have you here in this capacity as our curator at the Guam Museum. And we're here to talk about repatriation efforts of Chamorro artifacts, particularly from the Bishop Museum that are a part of the Hornbostel collection. This is this is not a it's not a new thing. I think that there are a lot of people out there that are generally familiar about the Hornbostel collection, but I know that there are also a lot of people who are not. A lot of people have kind of gotten connected to this issue because there's been a lot of talk around it. And that's, credit. I have to give credit to, of course, our Maguette and our team over at the Guam Museum, of course, the State Historic Preservation Officer, Pat Lujan, who really helped to kind of revitalize it, reopen this conversation, because this is a long-standing issue, not just for the people of Guam, but officially as a government. And this is one of the things that I really like about having this conversation is learning. And I have to again give credit and thank Maguette. Maguette is one of the people that really helped me to get my crash course in what is all things Hornbostel collection. But one of the things that really stands out for me is the deliberate nature of engagement by the people of Guam through the government. And for a lot of people are aware that we have like DCAs in possession of some of our ancestral remains that are associated with a lot of different projects on Guam, but there's a good number of them that are from the Hornbostel collection. And they wouldn't be here in DCA's possession here in Guam if it wasn't for the efforts of our local government. And so it's a really exciting thing, especially because, at that time I was so far disconnected from this conversation during the time that our ancestors were being returned. And that official return was in 2000.
2000, yes.
And the work, I can tell you from experience, what we've been doing, I feel like has been very, very aggressive. We've been very successful at a lot of points, but we're still a very long way, I think, from actually receiving the physical, the artifacts and having physical and legal. We have legal custody, but physical custody, right, of these items. I think we're a ways out from that. We're a lot closer than we've ever been, for sure, but just seeing what we've experienced in our engagement with Bishop Museum, in kind of like our era of this work, I can only imagine what it started like, what the conversation was when it started with our government and Bishop for the return of our ancestors, which is a much more obviously sensitive subject. But it's also, I think, the subject itself and the conversation itself has evolved so much because, and it's because of that work. I think that work really informed the way that we've had this conversation now.
Oh, absolutely. For those of you who are unfamiliar with repatriation, repatriation is the returning of artifacts, the returning of ancestral remains from museums, from universities, from collections, and it could be something as simple as like a bowl, it could be a painting, it could be human remains. And, the Bishop, for the Chamorro people in the Marianas, the Bishop Museum is the largest known institution that has collections from the Marianas. Right. There might be other places, somebody, Mark Zuckerberg might have like 1 million artifacts from the Chamorro people that we don't know about on his mansion in Maui. We have no idea. But at least what we know is that the Bishop Museum has the largest, and that the conversations around repatriation sometimes take decades. They take
absolutely.
Generations to happen. Sometimes it can move real quick. Sometimes there's a lot of resistance. Sometimes it becomes a legal battle. But at least where we're at now with this, it's been pretty successful. But I know that some people listening may not, they might have
Right.
heard Hans Hornbostel. They might not know who Hans Hornbostel is. And so I'm happy to talk a little bit
Yes,
about
I was gonna
how to
say,
see Hans
you know,
Hornbostel.
as we did our intro, I really enjoy the intro because I saw all these little pockets of places where the temptation to go into the weeds is really high. But Miguel is available to have this conversation with us for the duration of the show. So I'm trying not to I'm trying to avoid that temptation and not just spill all the beans right away. And I think you're right. It is appropriate for those that are unfamiliar with the issue that we start off with some history. I mean, why have this great historian in our studio if we're not going to take advantage of the full story, right? So let's start from the beginning. Let's just start first with who was Hans Hornbostel, and how did all of this go down? I mean, I think this is a very fascinating story, and it's fun because this is, I think, as you listen to this history, you'll find these little moments that are familiar to you. And that was what my experience was like. I was vaguely familiar with the Hans Hornbostel collection, with who he was, and with how all of this kind of began. And I remember hearing little snippets, like the whole thing about exchanging movie tickets for artifacts with kids. I remember hearing this story, but not really understanding the whole context of it. I just, I remember my recollection of it was just some guy was baiting kids to go and get collect artifacts in the jungle, and he would trade movie tickets for them. But I mean, it was awesome for me to learn the whole history and then place that piece chronologically in the timeline. So let's start with who was Hans Hornbostel, how did he get here, and how did all of this begin?
So I swear that they've already made a Netflix Operation Christmas Drop movie. Somebody is probably out there prepping a Hans Hornbostel Netflix
That would be
Hallmark
awesome.
movie or something like
Yep.
that, because
Limited series action.
there's his story is a little bit it's fascinating because there's native mystery superstition that Tautomona is going to get you. There's that dimension to it. There's some romance to it.
Yeah.
There's even some espionage to it. There's
yeah.
war happening. And there's also the archaeology aspect.
Right.
And so Hans Hornbostel, German ancestry, but emigrates to the United States, becomes a U.S. citizen, becomes a U.S. Marine, makes it out to the Marianas. And understanding his life is a little bit tricky because he was somebody who, I mean, if he was around today, he would probably be some social media TikTok influencer. Because
he definitely would be.
He told stories of himself. He thought real highly of himself. He thought he was going to make it big and so on. But when he was out here in Guam, this was the 1920s. And archaeology, anthropology was getting bigger in the United States. There's people moving across the Pacific, connecting with native peoples. No one had really done anything in Guam or the Marianas because in the minds of a lot of people, the Chamorro people didn't exist anymore. They were colonized. They were all gone. We were mongrels. We were bastardized peoples. We didn't exist. And so there wasn't anything to see here. There was nothing to find here. So people were collecting in the other islands, but there wasn't anything to really get from the Marianas. And so when Hans Hornbostel arrived here and he settled here, there was already a Navy guy, a Navy doctor, who had already started to kind of look at the latte, and he was talking to the Bishop Museum, and he was basically saying, "You want these latte stones? You want me to send you a latte?" Thompson was his name. And so Hornbostel connected with this Thompson guy, and they sent off the first of several latte pieces to the Bishop Museum. And so you can actually see like a picture of them. They took a selfie in 1922 of themselves. Now, selfies in those days, of course, you put it on a stand, and then you go and you wait, and you stay real still
For like 30 minutes.
But so This is at Epal Beach. Now, Epal Beach is very different back then, right? There had been a
Right.
leper colony there. There's no Hilton Hotel there. There's no PIC on the other side. There had been a leper colony that was closed down that had been an ancient Chamorro village.
Right.
There was bones everywhere. There's still bones all over the place today
Yeah, the
in the
entire, you
ground.
guys might not know, but the entire Epal Park is considered like a archaeologically significant area. You can't. That's why if you ever rent a pavilion, DPR is super clear. You cannot use stakes. You cannot, weigh your canopy with stakes, and that's why. Is
yeah.
because there's so much archaeological significance to that area that there's no point in just risking it.
Oh yeah, that's why when there was that smart park idea, they're going
Right.
to build like half-a-day roller coasters there or something.
That's ultimately, I believe that's what ultimately doomed the smart park, was that it's an impossible undertaking to figure out other ways to develop more what is already at the Epal Beach area.
Oh man. But so there's a picture in the Bishop Museum archives of Thompson, Hornbostel, and Hornbostel's wife lifting from a little crane in the back of their truck jitney thing, lifting a haligi and putting it in the back from Epal. And they took a latte from Epal, and then Hornbostel later worked on his own to take one from Hinapsan. And then he also took a number of other just Tassa capstones.
Right.
And so Hornbostel then got hired by the Bishop Museum himself to basically collect for them, because
Right.
they didn't have much from the Marianas, and his thinking was that he was gonna get paid for this work. He wasn't
Right.
in the military anymore, and he was thinking that he was gonna, that the Marianas was a unstudied, kind of undiscovered part of the Pacific, and he would basically tell stories that the secrets to unlocking human history in the Pacific is in the Marianas.
Oh yeah, this was his moment to make him like globally relevant.
And so he described to people like that the Lati are like tombs. And so some people who read his accounts or heard his stories thought that like people were buried inside of
like
the Lati.
encapsulated like a cocoon, which would be epic. But
And so when you read some of the articles that appeared in the Honolulu
Right.
at that time, it sounds now when you read the whole article, not just the headline, it's clear what he's talking about. But if you just read the headline, it basically he's making it seem like they're these tombs. The Lati are the tombs themselves, and you can tell that he was very much aware of like the headline readers of the time, like,
Right.
whoa, look at this, crystal tombs. But he was hyping up Guam, the Marianas. Now, what's really, really interesting and does not get as much attention is that he was, while he begins to collect for the Bishop Museum, this is the 1920s, and if you're familiar with the history of the Marianas, this is when Japan is in charge of the Northern Islands and Guam is under the United States. And so, if you are a U.S. citizen, you don't get to just freely travel to the
Right.
Northern Islands. And so the United States is worried that they have a disarmament treaty, that they can't militarize Guam. So the U.S. won't militarize Guam, the Japanese won't militarize Micronesia and the Northern Marianas. But the United States, of course, doesn't necessarily believe that Japan is keeping their treaty. And so this is where Hornbostel comes in.
Right.
Is that Hornbostel is basically hired as a spy, that as a anthropologist, an archaeologist, air quotes, he can then go and visit Rhoda Saipan Tinian, and he can go and visit historical sites, dig up bones, collect artifacts. He can take pictures, but he can also look and take pictures to see what the Japanese are developing,
Right.
what they're building up. And then he can then take and hide the film of that in the bones of the Chamorro ancestors that he's
how
collected.
crazy is that?
And
It
then
is
ship them
Netflix
back.
worthy for sure, for sure. Oh my gosh.
And so this is one reason why all of these things come together. The Bishop Museum wanted a bigger collection. They didn't
Right.
have much from this side of the Pacific at that time.
Right.
Hans Hornbostel wanted to make a name for himself, and
Right.
he had been involved in espionage when he was in the military before, so he was comfortable with this sort of thing, at least according to him. And the military wanted somebody to spy for them.
Right.
And so
It's
everything
kind of
comes
like the
together.
perfect storm, except for us. It was like a disaster storm for us, but definitely perfect storm in terms of these different opportunities that had developed within the context of the time frame that really made a lot of this possible. Which I think is also we'll talk more about the way that we as a people have been maneuvering to try to get these items home, but I think that that's one of the things that makes this a very interesting contemporary conversation is that it is so well documented, and there's really not a lot of wiggle room to say, oh no, that's not really how this happened. I mean, even in terms of the military's involvement in all of this, not just on the spy espionage side, which I think is also obviously very fascinating, but the impact, the ultimate impact that it had on our people and where we are now, and the way that this whole conversation in the industry itself is changing. Okay, so let's continue. So he's able to get access to the Northern Islands. He's got this whole arrangement set up, not just with the Bishop Museum, but also the U.S. military.
Oh, yes. And so now Hans Hornbostel is not a trained archaeologist.
Right.
And so this is one of the things that makes him stand out for the time, is that, when you're collecting, you don't want to take everything,
Right.
because then you're disturbing everything.
Right.
And he wasn't trained in how to take notes about stuff. He wasn't a fluent Chamorro speaker.
Right.
His wife was a fluent Chamorro speaker at that
Who's
time.
another really interesting character in this whole story.
Oh, yes. And so he had married a German woman who had grown up in Saipan and then was then living with her family in Guam. And she, by all accounts, her family was loved by the Chamorro people because they could speak Chamorro
Right.
and stuff. And so they called her Trudis Alemann, because her name was Gertrude, and Alemann means German, so they called her Trudis Alemann. And so it's very interesting because there's not a lot of strong memories that persist about Hornbostel himself, but older Chamorros talked fondly about Trudis Alemann.
Right.
And so people liked her because she spoke fluently, she knew Chamorro songs, she could make Chamorro jokes. So there was a lot about her, and so it was kind of clear that at least for Hans Hornbostel, his connection to the culture, his access to lands, depended on his wife making inroads for him.
Right.
Because one thing that's clear is when he goes in Guam, he's got access to a lot of places. When he goes to the Northern Islands, he writes that the Chamorros won't take him places,
Right.
because he wants, like in Rhoda, he says, like, well, where are the Tautomonastrong? And people are like, I'm not taking you there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then
not falling for that.
So he goes when he goes to the other islands, like, people are like, I don't know you, I'm not going
Right.
there. And
Right.
and he struggles to find people who will trust him because
Right.
he doesn't have his informants. He doesn't, but as long as he's got his wife, people feel more comfortable talking to him and sharing with him. But the thing, though, that makes him very kind of problematic is that he takes so much stuff. Like, he takes hundreds of remains,
Right.
and he takes thousands upon thousands of artifacts. And the final count is probably almost 11,000 pieces, which
Wild.
at a certain point was like 1/5 or 1/6 of everything the Bishop Museum had in their ethnographic collection.
Right.
And so Hans Hornbostel was like thinking about quantity over quality.
Right.
And he wasn't trained as an archaeologist, so he was kind of making up his own notes. He couldn't speak Chamorro, so his notes, according to the Bishop Museum team that has tried to like decipher his notes, they get better over time and more clear, because at the beginning he's kind of figuring out, how do I note down all this stuff?
Right.
Like, I found it here. And then eventually it gets better and it gets more clear what he's doing. But at the beginning, it's really confusing because as an archaeologist, you need, if you're going to take something away, you need to say where you found it. You need to say like how deep it was, because when you remove it, you lose a lot of the information that's important about where it was and what it was found next to.
No, that's the whole point for exhibition, right? Is that you're trying to tell a story of an item that is taken out of its context. So your job as an exhibitor or a curator is to recreate that context for the viewer. And so for, like a regular museum visit, your average museum visit, right? When you go to a display, this is basically what's happening, is that you're seeing this artifact kind of isolated in a case, and then there's language, right? There's some kind of story that's being told that helps you to understand, what is it that I'm really looking at, and why is it important, and where did it come from, and what is the story attached to it. And I think that that's one of the things that's challenging for us, is that, we are trying to have these items returned to us, but we also have to deal with how have these items been used or displayed, or how was the story told for us in other contexts and other places.
Oh man,
and completely disconnected from us, but also very inaccurate information in a lot of ways.
That brings us to the story that you mentioned earlier of the movie tickets.
Yes,
of the movie tickets. Part. And so, because Hornbostel, it's one thing if somebody is collecting, but at least he writes down like, oh, I found it at this cave, I found it at this burial, and so, but if through the Bishop Museum and Hans Hornbostel, you set up a program in which you are doing a call out because you want to maximize the amount of artifacts that you get. You put a call out saying, children of Guam, bring in an artifact and you get a free movie ticket for each artifact that you bring in.
That's a wild deal for a little kid in Guam at that time.
That's crazy. That's insane because number one, first of all, the child, and so there is a picture in the library here in their collection, of course, of a child bringing in a very large a basalt adze head, and taking a movie ticket at the theater. Where does that adze come from?
Right.
They probably didn't even ask the child, because this was just artifacts are us.
Yeah, right.
Just we want as much as possible. Just that idea that, Hornbostel's like, I'm going to fill the crates. I'm going to win the prize.
Yeah.
It's like, and so you just had kids encouraged to raid grave sites, latte sites. And so this was one of those big things that really kind of, that Hornbostel at that time represented like a challenge for Chamorro respect culture.
Right.
Because a lot of older Chamorros most likely looked at him and said, oh man, this guy's crazy.
Red flags everywhere.
But for younger Chamorros who were kind of wondering, this new American way, the old way is not as good, the new American way is better. And then the Hornbostel comes in and basically gives you a reason to not respect the words of your elders.
Yeah,
not
incentivize in abandoning your values.
Yeah, and so it's unclear, and when the Bishop Museum does their report, I hope that they can tell us exactly if from the records how many pieces in that collection come from the artifact sort of movie ticket exchange. Just because it would be interesting to know how many they got like that. But it's not like a great sort of thing because you can always have open calls for donations,
right?
But still, you want to get stories, like you said. But this is sort of the changing nature nowadays. Like for somebody like Hans Hornbostel, his mindset was most likely like, I want to get famous.
Right.
I want to give the Bishop Museum so much. This is how I'm going to get famous. This is how I'm going to make my name. But he wasn't thinking that these objects are really that important.
Right.
And he wasn't thinking about the Chamorro people.
Yeah, there was no like morality or ethics in the collecting of artifacts or the transferring of artifacts, not even the exhibition of artifacts. I mean, which is a huge thing right now. Worldwide, museums everywhere are kind of reckoning with, what do we do with these ethnic collections that we received and have through questionable means. I mean, the most famous example is probably the Smithsonian. I think it was a couple years ago. They had closed down like an entire section of the museum because all of it, belonged to indigenous peoples. Every single item, and they couldn't. It's not like they have clear kind of paperwork of this like up and up donation or exchange or legal mechanism to have received these artifacts. And so they just kind of knew like this whole thing is a mess. This whole thing is a mess. It's hard to deal with publicly right now. So let's just close it down until we figure out, the morally respectable thing to do and how we can, how can we continue this work and make right with these indigenous cultures. And so it's really interesting because at that time, this is just a couple years ago. And so I can only imagine what the climate was in collecting. It's not just Hans Hornbostel here. It's kind of got, Lati residue on his hands, but also the institutions themselves. And it's, the Bishop Museum was just this instance. I think there's a lot of similar activities with other amateur archaeologists or, selfishly motivated collectors and larger institutions.
Oh, absolutely. This sort of, it's all about what you do when you take other people's stuff.
Right.
And in a few generations ago, it might have been okay to take other people's stuff because you looked down on them. You thought they were less than you.
Right.
And then a few generations later, it's like, hey, buddy. Oh, yeah. Remember when my grandfather thought that you were like a primitive savage and naked? Yeah. Here's your basket back.
Oh, now that you have a PhD, we can have an intellectual and respectable conversation. So, and then we're kind of at the quarter or 3/4 mark here, and I want to make sure that we try to get as much of the Taladza covered here as possible. So, the other side of this conversation is how point A to point B, right? Once Hans Hornbostel had all of these items, human remains, sling stones, adzes, you name it. He had roughly 11,000 items they had to get from Guam to Hawaii to the Bishop Museum.
Oh, yes. And that's where, because of Hans Hornbostel's agreement, remember that this is the U.S. Navy's time to govern Guam.
Right.
And the U.S. sort of U.S. military colonial period, and so the U.S. Navy was more than happy to ship all that by boat to Hawaii because Hornbostel was spying for them.
Which is also very well documented.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. And so got the receipts. The Bishop Museum has the receipts. It's all in their communications as well, their bulletins and so on. And so once everything gets to the Bishop Museum, though, that's where things start to go a little bit wrong, because when Hans Hornbostel had started his collecting, there was a push to get more from the Marianas, and then things change. New curators come in, the attitudes, the philosophies change, and then people looked at everything he had, and they were like, whoa, what is all this? Oh, my goodness.
Right.
And even then people look at his notes and say, who is this guy? What is he doing? We can't read this. We can't understand this. And all these sorts of things come in because, from these islands in the Pacific, you didn't bring in a few dozen things. You brought in thousands of things.
Right.
And then hundreds of ancestral remains. And so what happens then is you have this massive collection, but it's not the type of collection that you want to like show off, because it's not the showy, exotic island collection. Right? And so what happens is that most of it gets hidden away. A few things get put out and incorporated into the Bishop Museum's exhibits over the years. And the Lati, for example, are put on display in the campus, sort of on the grounds of the Bishop Museum. But with this massive collection that they have there, most of it is never completed in its inventory, because it's so large and because it's a little bit confusing. And so it just kind of hangs out but that's a common sort of thing in museums,
right.
is that there's a big backlog and so on. But part of it is just that one set of curators wanted this, the next set of curators is kind of like confused and appalled that
Right.
you collected so much. And
And
I
this is
always,
not how we do it. You
No,
shouldn't
and-
have done it this way.
when I was at the Bishop Museum in 2022, we saw two collections from the Marianas. One was in Hornbostel in the 2020s, and it was like trays of hundreds of sling stones, and they have shelves of thousands of sling stones. And basically he wrote on everything and so on, and it's like hard to decipher his stuff. It's really confusing. And then 10 years later, a curator from the Bishop Museum came to Guam, and he visited because he was helping get set up the Guam Museum before the war. And what he did is he went around and he visited some local crafters, and he bought things from them.
Right.
And then he like wrote down their names and where he bought it from and the
Right.
year. And then there's labels that then they tied to the items.
Right.
And they have those in the collection too. And that's the more appropriate method of collection at that time, is that
Right.
you go and then you find something, who made it, where does it come from, identify it. But instead, Hans Hornbostel was like just grabbing things. He was
Right,
just
right,
like
right.
grabbing it and shoving it into his reusable bags and then running out the door before the security guard can grab him.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, and I know this is always a tough conversation, because on the other, here we are, and so many generations later, and having conversation with our counterparts at the Bishop Museum, who are also, several generations disconnected from all of this, like the initial kind of offense, right? And so it's tough, because we're obviously, every time we talk about Hans Hornbostel and this particular issue, we just throw Bishop Museum right under the bus with Hornbostel. But to be fair, the Bishop Museum, has really played a critical role in helping us to get to this point, where it's a real conversation now that this return is not just kind of a good idea. I think that there's a lot of substance to the conversation right now. There's been a very deep commitment by the Bishop Museum staff, which of course we're always appreciative of, when the technical experts, the professionals at the front line are on board with this idea. It's very important. But we also have to give credit to their their leadership as well, because I think that there's been a longer string of time where the working professionals agreed that we need to make this thing right. But it's only, there's pockets kind of time, small windows of time, where you see the institution's leadership in line with that idea. And that I think was very necessary in order to have the ancestors returned, but also I think very necessary at this stage that we are at now. I wouldn't even feel comfortable having this conversation on the air with you if I didn't feel like the commitment by Bishop leadership was genuine.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I'm definitely I want to be fair to our friends over at the Bishop Museum. Yes, this is a very uncomfortable, difficult situation and issue, but it's not. We're not having this critical conversation to continue to trash today's Bishop Museum and the working professionals there, the leaders over there. I think that we've come to a place where, even for us, I'm even proud of the way that that Guam has engaged at this stage, because even Guam, I feel like, has been very, very objective in just looking at it for what it is. Yes, of course, we have our own kind of personal, passionate ties to the collection. I am not an archaeologist. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not even qualified to help Maguette with the collection if we're short at the museum. I am that unqualified. But I still feel very strongly about this issue. I feel very grateful because of that. Because of the way that I see myself and my place in this conversation as a Tsumoru, minus all of my official roles and responsibilities. For me personally, I feel very grateful just to be this close to it. You know, for a long time, I was kind of on the outside looking in, just a casual observer who had a really strong opinion, which I think is also very important. You know, this is why I'm grateful that you're here to have this conversation with us, that, you know, there's a space for us to talk about this. Listeners out there, if you're interested in getting involved in this conversation, it's 922-1051 or 1052. But, you know, this is a really exciting time, because I think that more and more there's greater interest in it.
Mm-hmm.
I think because of the very deliberate approach of the government of Guam, particularly with SHPO and DCA, as well as the Bishop Museum staff and leadership. You know, it's not as scary a discussion to have anymore.
Oh, absolutely.
And
I mean,
go ahead.
oh no, Denancio, the one thing that makes the Bishop Museum different than a lot of the, you know, the big museums that are out there is that, you know, the Bishop Museum has Hawaiian roots.
Right.
You know, it is a Hawaiian institution.
Yeah, Bernice Pauahi Bishop.
Mm-hmm. And so and there have been struggles within the institution, because you know, sometimes the people who manage the collections are not Hawaiian.
Right.
They don't have roots in Hawaii. Sometimes they represent more like colonial ideas or imperial, you know, knowledge and stuff like that. And so there's always back and forth about that. And so, for example, the time when Hornbostel was there, that was a time when I think you could argue that the Bishop Museum, at least in its relationship to the Chamorro people, was a much more colonial institution.
Oh, absolutely.
But what we can see, though, in the time since, is that the Bishop Museum has tried to move away from that and move towards being kind of developing a maskaleng, manyetlu, like a more sibling, or the big sibling of the Pacific Museum relationship to a lot of us who are smaller than it, because I think the Bishop Museum is the largest in the Pacific, and then we're like the largest in the Western Pacific,
Right.
And so we've seen that a few times, and I'm grateful, especially when I was like a grad student learning about issues of repatriation. It was always like a nightmare. You hear about stories about, like, for Native Hawaiians, for Native Americans, it was always something that took years, decades. Like, it was always like a long, troublesome process. The repatriation that happened in 2000, it took a year or two.
That's wild.
And part of it was because it was the bishop. It was the Bishop Museum, and it was something where, it was this troubled collection where they were like, oh crap, they want access to it, they want to see it. Let's just give it back. I mean, why do we even have this? We shouldn't have these. Right. And it was NAGPRA. It was a good example, though, of how NAGPRA doesn't necessarily apply to the Chamorro people because we are a territory, but they chose to go NAGPRA and beyond just because it's the right thing to do. Right,
in principle, in the spirit, and that's something that we've, for me personally, it's something I've heard a lot said, and very, very kind of matter of factly, like they are acutely aware that NAGPRA, which is the Native American Graves Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, NAGPRA. So you'll hear this a lot. NAGPRA was pioneered by indigenous peoples, indigenous groups within the U.S. government framework, right? Native people, primarily Native Americans, First Nations peoples, but of course, Native Hawaiians, right? Now that they are a state, it's a federal mandate, and so they're covered under that protection. Now, because Guam is a territory and we don't have the same kind of rights, and I guess we don't get all the extras. We don't get the extras. We got like the basic package, the base pack. You don't get the rims with your Tacoma, but this is because we're not included and covered under NAGPRA, which makes it a very difficult process for us. I mean, even our museum framework is under the Department of Interior, right? Which is it's like that one always baffles me. I don't understand how did Interior become the museum experts, but nonetheless, what I think it has been very beneficial, helpful to us is what Miguel is talking about in this different perspective when it comes to our relationship with the United States, Native Hawaiian relationship with the United States, and how these federal policies that are some of these federal policies are built with a decolonial mind frame, right, or framework. We're trying to say, okay, how do we, at a policy level, federal policy level, how do we kind of rectify these wrongdoings? And, all due respect to the pioneers of NAGPRA and the beneficiaries of it, it's just a tough pill to swallow, because here's this major victory for indigenous groups in the United States, and then followed by the slap in the face reminder that you guys are still an unincorporated territory and you still don't have these rights and these privileges and these protections that are happening at this policy level. So I definitely appreciate that their bishop has kind of gone above and beyond in saying, we get it, we know that you can't just turn around and say, well, NAGPRA, do the right thing. But at least with us at our level, professional to professional, we're just going to operate under this premise because it is the morally correct thing to do. It's the responsible thing to do. We are coming up. We got about 4 minutes to the top of the hour. We're going to be taking a quick break soon. But I wanted to just kind of give us a way to kind of bookend this, close it out until the next hour. We will, Miguel is here for the next hour, so we're absolutely happy to talk more about the nitty gritty of the history and the timeline and all the little details that would make this an awesome limited series on Netflix. But in the next hour, the plan is to really take the deep dive into kind of the larger conversation around decolonization. What does any of this have to do with Guam's political status? And I think you're kind of already starting to see these little dots that can easily be connected. Ooh. But there's a lot of great ways that we can have this conversation in a larger context when it comes to political status and the rights of indigenous people, specifically for us here at home.
And we can talk about the Latte Stone updates at the Bishop Museum.
Which is very exciting.
And if people want to know updates on collections in Europe, too, because
there's
Sam Barnett and Andrew Gumatauta, who are two Chamorro researchers that are living out in Europe, have been doing great research, preparing collections for return. The process hasn't started yet, but they've done the research. And if you want to know about ancestral remains in Germany and the collections that are and remains that are in Spain, the collections that are out there, we can talk about that too.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much to discuss. So thank you to all of you who are tuned in to Challenge the Status Quo on Wave 105.1 FM. We are going to be taking a break at the top of the hour, and we'll be right back. Please don't go away. The number is 922-1051. We hope to hear from you in the next hour.
All right, here we go. It is 10:58 in the morning, and that right there is your Wendy's time check. You can check in with our friends at Wendy's today for that delicious bacon mushroom cheeseburger available at Wendy's locations. Check them out. Choose wisely. Choose Wendy's.
Young surprise! I'm back on Wave 105. It's your girl Nene every Saturday from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m.
Catch your island music tidal wave with Nene. Brought to you by San Lorenzo Laundromat.
Hats Tinting and Detailing offers premier services from complete interior cleaning and VIP detailing. And to keep you cool, Hats also offers factory, ceramic, blacked out, and based-approved auto tinting. For more information, call 647-SLAM.
Last I checked, only Jack in the Box has a meal with your choice of entree and 2 sides, even breakfasty ones, plus a drink served all day. I'll check again. Yep, just me. At Jack, every bite's a big deal. Limited time only. Participation may vary.
Welcome to Jack in the Box.
Political status impacts almost every aspect of our lives on Guam, but many are unaware of our right to self-determination and decolonization. What does it mean, and how can it improve our quality of life? Join the conversation, ask some questions, and learn more about your right to self-determination and the 3 legitimate political status options for Guam. Tune in to Challenge the Status Quo every Monday from 10 a.m. to noon on Wave 105.1 FM, presented in partnership with the Mission on Decolonization and Glimpses Media.
FM, Hagåtña, Guam. The sound of Guam is Wave 105 FM.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by O'Reilly Auto Parts.
I'm Jennifer Kuiper. In Los Angeles, fire crews are in a fourth night of fighting several large wildfires that have charred thousands of acres. KCBS's Matt Bigler says residents in the Pacific Palisades are facing an agonizing wait to see if their homes are still standing.
The burn damage is devastating here along Sunset Boulevard. Hundreds of multi-million-dollar homes reduced to ash and rubble. At the edge of the evacuation zone, residents have been begging officers for access to their properties.
My friend needs her medication. She doesn't know whether her home is standing or burned to the ground.
Cynthia Good says some residents risked arrest running past police checkpoints.
When the police turned the other way, he ran. They ran after him, but they couldn't find him.
An overnight curfew is now in place to prevent looting. Matt Bigler for CBS News, Pacific Palisades, California.
The NBA has postponed the Lakers, Spurs, and Clippers Hornets games on Saturday because of the wildfires. President-elect Donald Trump is officially a convicted felon, CBS's Bradley Blackburn reports.
In a historic courtroom moment, President-elect Donald Trump appeared virtually before a New York judge to be sentenced as a convicted felon. Prosecutors said he had attempted to cover up a $130,000 hush money payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels ahead of the 2016 election. Before the judge announced his decision, Trump spoke to the court.
I'm totally innocent. I did nothing wrong.
Trump had faced up to 4 years in prison for the conviction, but prosecutors agreed to the unconditional discharge after Trump's presidential win. Bradley Blackburn, CBS News, New York.
Robust arguments at the U.S. Supreme Court over whether to overturn or delay a law that could lead to a ban on TikTok in the U.S. CBS's Allison Keyes with more.
Congress and the federal government say TikTok poses a huge threat to national security, and Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh says.
Just on the data collection, that seems like a huge concern for the future of the country.
But lawyer Jeffrey Fisher, representing TikTok users and content creators, says.
Even if all this act goes into effect and the law goes through, TikTok gets to keep all the data.
Allison Keyes, CBS News, Washington.
A winter storm has dumped snow and ice as far south as Texas, over to Georgia, Tennessee, and for some, CBS's Maurice Dubois.
At Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, a Delta flight aborted takeoff, forcing more than 200 passengers to evacuate onto a snowy tarmac. 4 people were injured. The pilot reported an engine issue. Atlanta saw 3.5 inches of snow, the most there in 7 years.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro is sworn in for a third term after a re-election widely viewed as illegitimate. This is CBS News.
Think O'Reilly Auto Parts for all your car care needs. Get the parts and service you need fast from the professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
The county just requested more electric charging stations.
Orders have really amped up at Able Electric.
We need 3 more at First and Main, and we just got another hotel chain.
It's no shock. Able Electric needs able electricians.
Grocery store wants charging stations, too.
And fast.
I need Indeed.
Indeed you do. Put our matching platform to work so you can spend less time searching and more time connecting with talented candidates. Visit Indeed.com/credit and get $75 towards your first sponsored job. Terms and conditions apply.
Okay, I have to tell you, I was just looking on eBay where I go for all kinds of things I love, and there it was.
That hologram trading card. One of the rarest, the last one I needed for my set. Shiny like the
designer handbag of my dreams. One of a kind. eBay had it, and now everyone's asking, ooh, where'd you get your
windshield wipers? eBay has all the parts that fit my car. No more annoying, just beautiful.
Whatever you love, find it on eBay. eBay. Things people love.
Walgreens tops Wall Street's expectations as the suburban Chicago-based drugstore chain continues a turnaround plan. Company shares soared today after leaders told analysts that they have made progress improving one of the biggest concerns facing the industry, shrinking prescription reimbursement. The U.S. has unveiled new sanctions targeting Russia's energy sector. We'll get more on that. We check in now with Linda Kenyon. And Linda will have more in just a bit. We'll check in with Deborah Rodriguez on the story.
New numbers from Zillow show high demand and limited supply have sent prices soaring in Buffalo. With 2 new jobs created for every home built, the economy in New York's second largest city is booming, drawing young families and professionals. But Zillow's report points out the construction industry is struggling to keep up. That's expected to boost home values 3% this year after a 6% jump in 2024.
For Kuiper, CBS News.
Diabetes, high blood pressure, anxiety meds, everyone's on them. If you're a 50-year-old male, maybe a bit porky, and you may even have type 2 diabetes, $1 million of term insurance may only cost you about $200 a month. Call Term Provider. Speak with Big Lou at 800-230-2777. Big Lou will find a term life policy for you even if you have type 2 diabetes, are overweight, or have high blood pressure. Term Provider has helped thousands of people like you who think they can't afford term life insurance. To buy $1 million of affordable term life for you, all you need to do is call Big Lou at 800-230-2777. Lou will make sure the scales are tipped in your favor. Call 800-230-2777. Big Lou will answer your call and work to fit you into a term life policy that you can afford. Remember, Big Lou's like you. He's on meds too. Call 800-230-2777, 800-230-2777, or biglou.com.
The views and opinions expressed in this show are that of the show hosts, guests, and callers. They do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the staff and management of Wave 105 FM, Glimpses Media, or any of our partners. As we strive to provide quality, respectful, and engaging content, we welcome you to participate in the conversation. Thank you for tuning in to Wave 105 FM, the sound of Guam. Enjoy the show.
All right, Hafa and welcome back. You're tuned in to Wave 105.1, and this is Challenge the Status Quo. My name is Melvin Wonpat Borja. I'm the Executive Director of the Commission on Decolonization. I'm in studio today with Dr. Michael Lujan Bivacqua. He is the curator at the Guam Museum. We're talking in the last hour about the infamous Hans Hornbostel collection. And some of the history around, how these items found their way from Guam and the Marianas all the way to Hawaii and the Bishop Museum, and what is being done, what has been done in the past, what is being done now to have these items returned. We really dedicated the first hour to be able to set the context, tell the story, give people the historical kind of particulars, and fill in all of these blanks. And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who are listening and hearing pieces of this story that are familiar to them, that they've heard before, stories from their relatives. But there's not a lot of people are aware of how all of it transpired. Like we talked a little bit about kind of the perfect storm of opportunity, right? You have this guy who, is connected to the U.S. military in a time where the U.S. military didn't have access to the Northern Islands. There was very kind of little going on in the way of archaeology, anthropology. There was interest by a major institution like Bishop Museum and the willingness of the U.S. military to support, all of these efforts, which in the end resulted in approximately 11,000 items, and including ancestral remains, skeletal remains that were stolen from Guam and legally transferred to become property of the Bishop Museum. And then there are efforts to start repatriating, and those efforts really were focused on the ancestral remains, which have all been returned since 2000. But there are still around 10,000 items that are in the possession of the Bishop Museum that we are actively working to repatriate. So I figure the second hour, what we really wanted to do was to talk more about, the effort to return these items, what these efforts mean in a larger context. I'm sure there's somebody out there who's wondering what does the Hans Hornbostel collection have to do with decolonization and political status? I thought this was a political status show, but and then this is where we're going to connect the dots, and I think we're going to do it pretty well, because I really believe that there are a lot of principal manifestations in this situation that are very similar to other aspects of our lives and our existence as a colony in 2025. So let's start with repatriation.
Yeah, this is a very good point. What do these things have to do with decolonization?
Right.
And there's so many ways that we could tackle this, but let's first just start off with what is the connection or the relationship that Chamorros have to these artifacts,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
So if somebody comes and digs them up and takes them out of your land and puts them in a museum far away, have they severed that connection?
Right.
Have they broken that connection? Have they given a new connection, right? Man, that sounds like colonization, right?
Right.
When a colonizer comes in, puts down a flag or builds a church on your land or tells you can't practice this anymore, they come in, they tell you everything is different, this is our way now, and
Right.
so on, right? So when we think about this, though, with these artifacts, the Hans Hornbostel came in and said, these are mine. These belong to archaeology. These belong to the way that I'm going to make my career, the way that we're going to tell the history of the Pacific. These belong to the Bishop Museum now, and so on. And part of his argument, and the argument that archaeology and anthropology at that time had, is that, these are simple, primitive peoples. They don't care about these things. They don't understand these things the way that we do.
Right.
It's like... And I always apologize because I grew up liking Indiana Jones, and Indiana Jones always says, this belongs in a museum.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, shut your face.
Yeah,
Give
Indiana
it back
Jones,
to the people.
Just stop, Harrison Ford. You're killing me.
But
I got to say, I also was... Miguel and I are around the same age. I was also a fan of Indiana Jones. Watching Indiana Jones now, like I try to show, I'm always like sharing these old films with my daughter, and watching Indiana Jones with my 9-year-old now, I'm just like, man, this is super problematic. All of this is terrible. All of the depictions of the indigenous peoples, like all the inaccuracies, like kind of like made up cultural aspects. The like racist depictions of what's the kid's name that plays Beta in Goonies?
Oh man, you mean Short Round?
Yeah, Short Round. Dude, his name was Short Round.
Oh yeah,
rough.
So yeah, that's like a good example. He's like, this belongs in a museum, and now I'm kind of like, give it back to the people, leave it in its place.
Right.
You don't need to touch it. You don't need to take it. What the hell are you doing, man?
Right.
And so that's part of that idea, right? Is Hans Hornbostel is saying, this only has value if I take it.
Yeah, if we put it in a museum.
Put it in a glass case far away where everyone else in the world can admire it, where somebody else can study it. It has no value if you leave it where it was, or leave it with the people who created it, and so on.
Right.
And so, and even in the discussions around repatriating these artifacts and stuff, some people have said, well, what do these things matter to the Chamorro people anymore? You don't live in laddie houses anymore. You don't really make these sling stones anymore. You don't make pottery anymore and stuff. But it's like, I always like to remind people that one reason why the Hornbostel collection was so problematic was that sometimes over the years, when they would put things out on display, Chamorros would always ask questions about it. So, for example, one of the big pieces that they would have out is the Asquiroga pictograph. And so this is from Asquiroga, the caves in Talafofo, where you got to go back into the jungle a little bit. But if you go, there's a cave back there that has drawings on the walls. But if you go back there today, there's a hole
piece missing. This is crazy. By the way, if you're curious and you want to visit the site, if you're going up the hill like you're heading to Endy, I'm sure if you pass by there, you've seen cars kind of just parked on the side of the road there, right going up the hill before you get to the school, and that's where the trailhead is. It's kind of a rough park spot, but the trail's fairly short. It's a fairly easy hike, but it's a beautiful site. A lot of people, I think, have been to the caves up in Letexen. They're a lot more, I guess, well known. But it's awesome to go to this site that's, super far from the Letexen site and see, these similar motifs drawn onto the walls of the cave. And I remember seeing it. I remember going to the cave and seeing the chunk of rock, like literally chiseled out of the wall. There's like this hole, like a dent in the inside wall of the cave. and you know that there's something missing. And then later in life, I'd seen the photograph of that piece that was taken, that pictograph that was taken. And so just recently, we went to engage the Bishop Museum board after so many months of years worth of engagement with the professional staff. We're at that stage where we're like, okay, everybody on the staff is on board. We all support this, but we don't make the call. The board has to make the call. And so they were already kind of doing their work in socializing the issue with this board. Most of whom were not around when the collection was received or when even the work was being done for the repatriation of the ancestral remains. And so for the first time this year or late last year, when was it? When did we go? January? December.
When did you go? You went in December.
December, late last year. So when I went late last year, this was the first time that I was in face to face with the artifacts. I'd seen photos of it. Miguel has been out there a few times for training, been able to see them, work closely with the staff. Miguel always gives me the updates. I get the photos, but it's my first time actually seeing it. It was such a visceral experience to see that one piece, that chunk of wall. And I was like, that's it. I just wanted to take it. Can I take it home? And I want to just fit it. I want to see what it looks like back in, But it was such an amazing experience, and it definitely made it for me personally, made it a lot easier to stomach. I feel like it all happened the way it was supposed to. The ancestors only allowed me to see it late last year, because if I had seen it earlier in my life, I may have caused a lot more trouble and messed this whole thing up. I would have been offended, from the cut, and it would have been bad.
You would have hidden it under your fuck-eye shirt.
Yeah. This doesn't belong in the museum unless it's the Guam Museum. I get my Indiana Jones hat on. But let's go.
There's a picture of them chiseling it out of the wall. They took a picture of one of his Chamorro assistants chiseling it out of the wall.
It's so wild. I encourage you to go to the site and see it. There's a lot of photos of this particular piece. And it's an amazing thing to kind of see the actual site and where it was stolen from, and then to see what it looks like when it went to Bishop.
And so the thing is that the latte and then the pictograph, over the decades, when Chamorro pieces were incorporated into the Bishop Museum, Chamorros would ask questions about why they were there or how they got there.
Yeah.
And so, the curators at the Bishop Museum did let us know that when Hornbostel took the pictograph, it was common at that time to chisel things out of walls and then take it away to museums and so on. So, like you're in Egypt, you can't take everything. So you take something out and then you take it back and so on. But so whenever they would put the pictograph out, though, Chamorros would say, hey, I remember those from Guam. Yeah. Why do you have one? Yeah. How did this get here? And then some poor assistant, in the 70s would be like, I don't know. And then they would go back, and then the next day you go back, and then that pictograph is hidden. They covered it up. They took it into the back because it's like, why do we have this? What's going on here? Because it's one thing if you are like the Metropolitan Museum, the British Museum, and you're taking things from Egypt. But why is the Bishop Museum stealing things from the Chamorro people? And so it was wrong and it was weird. And so, but the Chamorro people were always asking questions. The latte that the Bishop Museum put up, Chamorros were always wondering, how did these get here? Why do you have latte? And some people found it cute. Other people were like, is this okay? Yeah. Is this wrong? Because you remember that nowadays we see latte and maybe we think this is good. We're respectful. It's tied to the ancestors. In the past, you see latte are like, man, the Tautomona's here. Yeah. The Tautomona are going to get you, man. You don't mess around with the latte. And so the bishop had this collection, and every time they would bring it out, random Chamorros would always be questioning. What are you doing with this? Hey, hafesti? Hey, boy, hafesti? Ginin manuesti? I don't know. Exhibit closed.
And the latte, I think for good reason, have become kind of the centerpiece of the modern conversation. And it's so interesting, when we went to I was in the Bishop Museum board meeting with the lieutenant governor, because he was on his way out to another engagement, and so it just so happened that the board had a meeting scheduled around that same time. And so we consulted with the staff. They said, yeah, this is a good time, because this will be it'll be the committee meeting for the cultural resources and collections. And then right after that will be the meeting of the full board. And so the Cultural Resources Collection Committee gives their recommendation to the full board, and they are ultimately the ones who make the decision. And so when we met with both the committee and the board, we made sure that on our side we had our professional, Dr. Bavacqua, to share some of the history around not just the full collection, but the Lati in particular. And it was so interesting to me, because this is one of the things that you had mentioned in the meeting when you're briefing the board and the committee, was that the Lati themselves have kind of taken on its own spirit and lore. And how over the years, you kind of describe this, that different people have come to visit the museum and have seen the Lati, and have these varying perspectives on why is this here? I don't even know how I feel about this. But it's also become at one point it became kind of this like unsolved mystery of the Bishop Museum, because the Lati for a long time were in prominent display on the campus. And then, they're kind of change in leadership and directives, priorities, and then they were removed.
They did construction. They built a new
building.
Right,
they built a new hall.
They were taken down and put in the back.
Yeah, and so actually one of the board members was in the meeting, and after the meeting he had kind of stopped LT and I and said, when I was here back in the 70s or something like that, before they had built that hall, he mentioned they were always on display in this area, but I know that they were moved when they approved the construction for that building. And that's where his knowledge kind of stopped, right? I don't know what happened after that. He left. He was no longer a part of the museum staff, came back later, several decades later, to become a board member. But it was just an interesting thing, because after that hall was built, that's when like the mystery of the missing Lati began. And this is also one of my favorite stories. So Miguet was invited to attend a training with the Bishop Museum.
Oh, yes.
And it also, the invitation was also extended to the CNMI. Mm-hmm. And so it was actually the director of the library at the CNMI who was attending, and her husband was also there. And so this is the intro. I'll let Miguel tell the story. But this is, at least for me, this is kind of where this began, in how we started to get more deliberately engaged with the Bishop Museum staff on this particular issue.
Oh, hell yeah. You're so right so there was always this uncertain connection, and you're right that it was like this unsolved mystery, because there was Chamorro artifacts there, but they were sometimes on display. They sometimes wouldn't be on display. And then the Lati were there, and up until the 70s. And then after that, they were gone. And then sometimes people would hear that they had been taken somewhere else, and people would look for them, and they weren't sure where. And then somebody would say, oh, I found them. They're in the back. And then you would find like Chamorros like sneaking around looking for the Lati.
It was like Pokemon. Like Chamorros would go to the Bishop Museum, and that was the Pokemon they was trying to find. the mystery of the Lati, And it's a really interesting story.
Go.
Right. It really depends on who you ask. Like the older Chamorros who had been to Hawaii, they all confirmed, like, yeah, we've seen them. Yeah, I saw it. I heard it was there. I went to go see it. And then, as you post 1970-ish, that's when it's like that's when it became a mystery. Like Chamorros would hear about it. They got I got verbal confirmation from a good source. They saw it themselves, and so I went looking for it, but I couldn't find it. I went everywhere. I looked all over. I saw a bunch of other Chamorro items, but not the Lati.
And then the staff themselves wouldn't know. Right. Because if you were older, then you knew. But then if you were younger, you didn't. But it was also an embarrassing thing because they had been placed in the back next to rock piles, trash, recycling. Right. And so, like, a lot of the staff didn't even know that they were Lati. Like, so For example, in 2022, when me and Nicole Dueñas, Alyssa Santos, Erlinda Napoti, Tyler Warwick, Archie Acoste, when we were out there for Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Museum Institute training, we were at the Bishop Museum a lot. And, you know, some of the staff confirmed that people thought the lati, because they were laying on their side, that they were like there for recycling.
Right.
They would put like flattened boxes on them. They would put pallets on them because they were there. They were just hanging out there. And
nobody knew what they were.
And so some staff knew what they were, but most didn't. And so some people said, oh yeah, we should put a sign letting people know what they are. But that was really, you know, and so people had been saying for a long time, but when we were there, that was really, I think, the Bishop Museum, some of the curators there were already talking about, you know, we need to prepare the Hornbostel collection. Right. And when we were there in 2022, we already said, look, we're going to go back to the Marianas, and then we're, you know, I'm going to tell everyone I know that we're going to ask for them back.
Yeah.
And so you should get ready, because we had a little ceremony. We said, you know, thank you to the people of Hawaii, the people of the Bishop Museum for watching over these things, but they're going to come home soon.
Right.
And so, but the story that you're alluding to was that when we were there, people who knew where the lati were still didn't have like detailed information on them.
Right.
They didn't have them in the ethnographic collection. And so they weren't sure like how many there were. Right. And so there was the Hinapsan lati, there was the Ipau lati. And so we were kind of looking around because, you know, we were sure there was more lati.
Right,
we were
and
sure
there was something from Rhoda.
Yeah, we were sure there was more, and there was references to more, and it was hard because at that point, you know, the Bishop Museum wasn't where they were at now in terms of really digging into the Hornbostel collection, digging into the lati history. Now they know so much more. But at that point, they were just starting that work. And so we were just wandering around looking. Like, and
Pokemon searching.
We were. And so, you know, we were going here, we were going there, and Senora Linda and her husband, Senor Martin, they were there, and then he was just like, he's like, Doc, manyanyan tidzu. It's like, I feel something.
I love this.
Manyanyan tidzu. Manyanyan tidzu guini gua mas lati guini. And I'm like, Senor, mangi esti. And he's like, Maila, tatidzu. And then we're all like following him, and he's like feeling, he's like felt lati.
I love it.
And then so we were on like one side, and then we were following him down this path, down this road, and he's going to like the oldest part of the Bishop Museum, the oldest building, I think. And there's like this big mass of like weeds and plants and so on. And he's like, Walati guini hu shashenti. He's like, there's a laddie here, I feel it. And so he starts to like pour through and open up the vines, and there's like a big piece of limestone there, and like he opens it up, and there's a massive tossa right there. And that's the biggest tossa, the luta tossa is right there. And the Bishop people that we were talking to did not know it was there.
Right, it had been moved prior to these employees starting at Bishop.
And it had gone completely grown over. And so it was found, like the spirits had guided him there.
I love it.
It was so cool.
See, we are now parts of the lore. You have become an official like chapter in the telling of this story, which is really, you know, it's so fun. I love this story because there's so much to it. But what I really appreciate is that, you know, there was already kind of this, like Miguel had said, there's this air around the conversation that we were not hiding our cards. We were very upfront. Like, look, we all know that this is not, these items shouldn't be here. We even know that there were kind of technical difficulties, and even if they're willing, we weren't ready earlier than this to receive it. And a big part of it is the maturing, the evolution of the Guam Museum institution. As an institution, we have grown significantly. You know, we're no longer at the Garden House. We're not nomads. We have a facility, a bona fide facility. We have working professionals, and now we've added the repository building and operation, which is, you know, it's these are major steps because, for better or for worse, we are a part of, you know, kind of the school of thought in how do you handle cultural collections, historically relevant collections, precious artifacts. You know, how do you preserve these things, and, you know, what are the museum standards of care? And so, you know, there's this whole kind of technical process that needs to happen, even though we have a very kind of clear principle moral agreement with the Bishop Museum professionals that, yeah, these should be returned. We should honor NAGPRA. It doesn't change the reality that, you know, these are still items that hold value, monetary value to the institution. And there's a procedure in how you transfer or rematriate items to their original owners. And so, you know, this is part of the exciting thing, I think, is that there's been this deep commitment, and it's not just a, you know, superficial, I'm going to tell you what you want to hear, but they're actually, you know, the staff is actually doing the work. They even came to Guam to visit the sites where Hornbostel collected items in order to close the gap on these horrible notes, because that's all they have, right? They have all of these field notes, but no archaeological report, in order to close the book on it and say, okay, now we're accountable for every single item. We have all the information that we need in order to now take it out of Bishop possession and officially transfer it back to the people of Guam. And part of the challenge, even after we kind of agreed, this is what we want to do. We all know this is, you know, we agree this is how it should happen. The next question was, well, what about the CNMI? Because it's not all just items that belong to Guam. Where is the CNMI on this issue? And so it was an exciting time, I think, for us, because we had already kind of started our conversations with the working professionals in the CNMI. And so we, you know, even I think in the very beginning we weren't sure, but we knew that the CNMI government, even if they weren't quite ready to receive the items themselves and care for them, we agreed that they preferred the items come to Guam and be a little bit closer to home with their brothers and sisters in Guam, and it's in the Marianas. We knew that it's an easier hill to overcome in a negotiation between Guam and CNMI than it would be for CNMI alone with the bishop. And so it was an awesome thing to see all of these things come together, kind of like our modern day 2020's perfect storm of events that came together. But you know, here we are now, where we know that it will take some time for all of the technical requirements to be met in order for the bulk of the full collection to be transferred. But because, you know, we had this cooperation on the return of the ancestors, and now that even those principles have evolved, right? Because even NAGPRA itself doesn't just cover human remains, but funerary objects. And so it was a cool thing for me to be there and watch Megid school all of these board members on why the Lati cannot be disconnected from our ancestors. And if you were willing to return the ancestors, then the same kind of respect should be applied to the Lati. Yeah. And we know that culturally, you know, most of us know that, you know, no matter how it has evolved or changed, right? Like in the past, yeah, we see the Lati and we're afraid, because that's where the Tautomona is, and, you know, you don't want to take a chance. And even though now, you know, I think it's fair to say that the kind of perspective around finding Lati in the jungle has changed. A lot of us, I think, get excited when we see Lati. We're not afraid of them, you know, but nonetheless, we still regard and respect them, you know, in a very real way. And I really appreciated that. Not only did I feel like we were represented very well by Dr. Bavacqua in that engagement, but the message was received very well. And I think a lot of it is because the perspective in the institution has changed as well. There's a lot more kind of deliberate Hawaiian approach, native Hawaiian approach. And, you know, they like us regard these items as more than just objects.
Oh, absolutely. It's, you know, the Bishop Museum has changed over the years. And I think they definitely see us as has grown a lot too, because I've working with our counterparts, Haloa Johnson, Sarah Kawai. They're both head curators and in ethnology. They're the main people that we're working with on this, and they've been trying to track, because at different times there was curators at the Bishop Museum who were interested in repatriating parts of the Hornbostel collection. So it happened like in the 90s, before the ancestral remains returned, they gave back some items.
Right.
And there's been different moments where they were willing to give back small amounts of it. And then, like, what was the thinking back then? Why didn't they give more? And maybe it was because there was lack of space, no permanent facility at that time. Who knows? But I'm just grateful now at this point that they're putting in the work, and as you said, it's part of a relationship. That's for me. That's what's so important, is that because what we see with a lot of the repatriations that are happening, even in the Marianas now, is that it's just a straight up return.
Right.
Here's a box. Feel free to chant. Feel free to take it back. But that's it. It's over.
Right.
It's done.
Then they wash their hands. And it's over. You're right. And that's one thing that I really appreciate about this engagement now, is that we have been very deliberate, and they have been very receptive to this idea that the return of the items is really just kind of the initial phase. But the long-term approach here is that we want to continue to have a relationship, and we want to be able to be an active player in the development of indigenous-led museum practices and standards. And so what we're doing really now is I think the long-term vision is that as Bishop has continued to evolve and has kind of reckoned with their cultural perspectives as Native Hawaiians against kind of these like institutionalized standards by DOI in regard to museum preservation, that we've all kind of learned how to play this game. And now the question, I think, is how do we approach this work in a way that puts us at the front, that puts our values and our perspectives and our responsibilities at the forefront. And still, of course, we can't just ignore these museum standards and these procedures, but nonetheless, in the same breath, we assert that our cultural perspective and our indigenous perspective also cannot be ignored.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I think it's great. I think it's great because what we're seeing now is this commitment to engage in professional development, to help develop our institution and our working professionals. And our intent is to turn right around and do the same thing. As Miguel mentioned, the Bishop Museum is likely the biggest institution in the Pacific. But the Guam institution is the biggest in the Western Pacific. And we're seeing now our neighbors, even just here in Micronesia alone, are taking deliberate steps to develop their museum presence and institutions. The Marshall Islands just recently received a commitment for new funding from their newly signed compact to stand up a nuclear museum, which is a really important thing. I think even people on Guam are very unaware of the history of nuclear activity and testing in the Marshall Islands, and how that in a very real, tangible way affects us and our reality today. And so, museums are always, I think, a double-edged sword. In some ways, like I think a lot of us indigenous people, we appreciate museums because they represent education and the preservation of our history, but they're also very problematic spaces because we are often treated like objects in the conversation. We're rarely involved in the conversation. But, museums everywhere are indigenizing. Right, they're kind of changing the way. Even we probably kind of caught that Miguel and I are switching back and forth between repatriation and rematriation, which is a very real movement. In the museum industry, a lot of professionals are using rematriation because there is a difference. Absolutely. And it's the recognition of our. I personally appreciate it because we are a matrilineal society, which often kind of gets lost in translation.
Again, I appreciate it. It's actually been through this work with the Bishop Museum and really working with people such as Healoa and Sarah and others, where they've really helped me understand more about the difference between repatriation and rematriation. And there's no set way to think about it, but think of it as like a more comprehensive, and rematriation as a more comprehensive, holistic, but also potentially more community inclusive and grounded process. Like a repatriation, a lot of times is just like, comes from an institution, goes to the government, and then kind of sits in a collection, sits in a museum, which might be the goal. It might be good, but a rematriation might be that it gets returned to the community. The government might be involved, they might facilitate it, but then it might go to the community that it came from instead. And instead of just focusing on the item itself, right? Because in many cultures, your matrilineal line, the women, these are the ones responsible for your genealogy, right? And so that's important because, the Bishop Museum, a lot of the heavy lifting that they've done is going through and finding as much information as possible about where every artifact comes from.
Right.
So that every sling stone that Hans Hornbostel dug up, every sling stone that he collected, that we can trace it back to where he got it from.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important because, there's people for many people, a sling stone's a sling stone. But for those people who collect a lot of sling stones, they know that there's different types of sling stones.
Right.
And that maybe these types of sling stones come from this area, and then for me, what I'm looking forward to is when we get the Hornbostel collection back, and then we already have in the Guam Museum thousands of sling stones. And we get them all together, and then we can really do like a big sling stone analysis, one big analysis to rule them all, and really say did the people in this area make a particular type?
Right.
Did the people in this area, because sometimes people like Roman de la Cruz, even the late Johnny Cakes, Defuntunay, they would say, oh, you find a lot in this area made this type. And a lot of it is just, their what they feel and what they see and their experiences. But it would be good to combine that then with, let's put a sample of 10,000 sling stones in one place. What's their composition? How are their style? And then we can say, did the people of Tumon in ancient times have a particular sling stone style?
Right.
For me, as the curator of the Guam Museum, I would love it if we get them back, we combine with what we already have, we organize it, and then we can actually dig deep into the knowledge of our ancestors and come up with some stuff like that.
It's super fascinating. And I think the thing that really stands out for me here is that, when we're talking about the return of items and we're talking about it, through this rematriation lens, the X factor to me is the people, our people, and their involvement, their role, and their agency in what we do with it after, right? Because, it's true, right? Now that the damage is done, the stealing has happened, the looting and raiding, right? And we're here now in 2025. The only thing that really stops this conversation about, these are just things, and allows us to assert value in it is what we do with it after. What happens after the Hornbostel collection is returned. And to me, that's a really exciting thing, is that, if you look at the history of the Guam Museum, I think that the Guam Museum really started to kind of spread its wings when we started to see a lot more community involvement and engagement. I really don't believe that we would be where we are now with the facility and the institution if it was not for kind of the buy-in of the people in the community. There are a lot of people who came together to help develop what is now the permanent exhibit. Even the design, the architectural design of the building is a statement in and of itself. And so, it's a really exciting thing for me to think about, this, especially in the context of decolonization and political status. If we remove that community factor, right, and that community buy-in and engagement, then even with a beautiful facility like we have now, even with more resources to hire more professionals than we have now, the museum is not, a true home for our artifacts. It's not a place that we can truly call an educational facility for culture and our people. And so I'm really thrilled to, I like you am thinking about what is going to be returned to Guam from the Hornbossel collection, and what does that look like in context with everything that we already have, and how does this collection enhance what we have now? How do they kind of work together and just really build up this amazing value? But I when I think about the engagement, what I love about it most is that this is because we've developed these relationships with the Bishop Museum. Now we're having a conversation at a moral level and the principles of our relationship, right? It's not just stuck in like the procedure of it, which is always the kind of that's like the killjoy in the decolonization movement, is that we've had so much passion and creativity and intellect that has been contributed to the conversation, but we always get caught up on the procedural hurdles. I don't think that self-determination is unpopular in Guam. I think that a lot of people are very interested in self-determination, but we're also very disheartened because every time we take 2 steps forward, we take 1 step back. And the most recent, I would say, is the Davis hurdle, right? The Davis case hurdle. We as a people came together through our representative democracy and built this law, this policy that created a mechanism for us to have a self-determination referendum. But, lo and behold, so many years later, there's this federal court, there's this challenging court that goes up to the Ninth Circuit Court, and now we're stuck at this impasse because our colonizer is telling us how to decolonize. Our colonizer is saying that, oh yeah, self-determination is your right, but only if you do it the way that we approve of. And so, and people ask all the time, well, when are we going to have a vote? Which is, of course, the $1 million question. And it's such a challenging one to address because it's like, yeah, we want to vote too, but I think that we're seeing a reflection of the perspective by our people that, yeah, we want to do this, but we want to do this in a way that we feel is appropriate. And so the law, despite being shot down at the Ninth Circuit Court level and despite being rejected on an appeal to the Supreme Court, is still good Guam law. It's still legitimate Guam law. It's still codified in our books. And so, and I think that if there was really an interest, if the people of Guam really felt like, well, we'll just do it however the U.S. says to do it, that we would have repealed that law a long time ago and replaced it with something that adheres to the confines of the federal court ruling. And so I love this engagement because here we are acting as a sovereign. And, we know that we're not a sovereign. We know we don't even get covered under NAGPRA. But, we don't walk in the room with Bishop presenting ourselves as inferior. We walk into the room with our heads held high with dignity because we did our homework. We know the history, and we know that we're in the moral right here. And it's very refreshing to not be met with resistance and skepticism. It's nice to have, our Native Hawaiian counterparts on the opposite side of the table saying, yeah, we agree with you. We want to do the right thing too. And it just gets me all caught up. I'm over here like, why don't we ever have this kind of engagement with DOI and the State Department or even at the United Nations? So it's a very, I think it's equally exciting and equally optimistic as it is kind of disheartening and very daunting in the sense that it just always gets me caught up. Like why don't we have this kind of action on political self-determination?
It's true.
Why don't we have this kind of buy-in even at a local level? I think a lot of people are disheartened, even though I think that they support self-determination, they support decolonization in principle. I think that they're disheartened because they're like, well, we've been on this and we've been asking for this, but when are we actually going to vote? We're never going to vote. I think there are legitimately a lot of people out there who support this, but who really believe that we're never going to actually vote.
No, I think I definitely agree with you there. I think that issues like this kind of keep the passion.
I think so too.
They keep the passion alive, but I think that what we see now is that the leaders, I think that the leadership has not found itself yet on this. That the community is, I think one thing that some people say, though, is that like in the pandemic, this became like an issue that people cared about less. I don't necessarily think that's true.
I
think that it became like, I think for a lot of political leaders, it became less important during the pandemic because, but I think that for, issues of political status happen, they happen slowly. We build it up slowly.
Right.
And like you were saying, kind of the place where people are at now has slowly kind of built up. And so kind of have to take advantage of that. And it can regress. That's the thing, is that if you don't keep building, then it can kind of, oh yeah, I'm good.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, we have a caller. Okay, we got Joaquin on the line who would like to join in the conversation. Hafide, Joaquin, are you on? Can you hear us? Can you turn your radio down just a little bit? All right. You have a question or a comment?
Sure. I'm just listening to you guys on the radio, and I have a few comments to make about that.
Go for it.
Por favor.
As much as I would like to see some more artifacts back in Guam, I'm in a way, it's kind of good that these things were held somewhere else, because otherwise they might have been lost. Like, we have these artifacts called public schools, and we cannot even take care of that, much less, valuable, precious things. So I'm just wondering if it's such a great idea if we have the capacity. We all know Guam, so do we have the capacity to be able to take care of these things? And second of all, we talk about repatriating, but, Nana or Chamorro people are so complicit in this, because if you go anywhere, you see them in their front yard. I mean, they're the ones that are taking it, not the Howleys. It's the Chamorros are pulling it out of the jungle. So, you can go to the store. Even there's a place that you can buy these things if you wanted to. The black market, flea market. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that. And the third is, there are some artifacts that people own, like it's been in their family. And what happened if I want to give it to somewhere else? Wow, Lamon, right?
Yeah, I think that's also, that's part of the conversation with the items that are in possession of the Spanish government, is that not all of those items are, were acquired inappropriately. I've even seen they have like handwritten notes where Chamorros who own artifacts were donating them to Spain. And so, I think that no matter what, the conversation is complex when it comes to, how museum institutions were able to acquire these items. And I think it's a fair point, to ask does Guam have the capacity to receive this collection and maintain it? I think it's an absolutely fair question. But I would venture to say yes. The answer to that is yes. I think that we're in a different place now in terms of our institution and our working professionals. I know I can tell you from my own personal experience that this is absolutely a priority for the Department of Chamorro Affairs and the Guam Museum, is to appropriately staff our institutions so that we can continue to have this operation benefit our people and our community. But I also I think that the big thing here for me is that the way that we intend to do this work, and the way that we should appropriately do this work, is to involve the community. And I think that that's the right way. That's the way that we're going to have the buy-in. That's the way that we're going to assert the value of these items and the continued value of these items, and how we are able to use them and our people are able to benefit from them. Because I agree, if we were to receive these items and they just sit in collection and, never see the light of day and nobody ever knows that we have them, it's extremely problematic. But
Senor, I've been to the Bishop Museum and I saw all these wonderful things. And I know that there's people, Lana, they're crying or whatever. I don't know what's their problem. But, but for me, I'm a realist. And, I've been at the rodeo a few times. That's good and cute, that you and you have a great staff. You have Senor Babacqua there and all that. That's so wonderful. You guys are probably underpaying yourself. But that's good that you're doing it now. Well, what happens in 4 years in the next election if the next government doesn't take care of these things? Then what? We moved all this stuff over here and it's just going to rot at the DNA building or wherever they've been putting it? I mean, come on.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And this is why I said I think that the best thing I've done so far is hired Dr. Miguel Bavaco. He's now a classified employee at the Guam Museum. But And I think it's also fair because we've had the ancestors' remains since 2000, and there's been a law even all the way up at the highest level of the legislature, right, that was passed to create Inaftan Mananyata, right, which is where we intend to permanently reinter the ancestors that came from the Hornbasso as well as other sites.
Said, that's from 2000 and it's 2025.
Right, and we only
isn't even done.
Right, the legislature only approved the funding last year.
Yeah, I mean, if that was a person, that person would have already graduated from graduate school.
Well, didn't answer.
So we're gonna hem and haw all day long, but and let's be honest, you guys. You guys are getting paid. You might as well be curatorials from Ross because, you're not getting paid what you're supposed to. So, we don't have the capacity. We don't have the money. We don't have the adequate resources. We're not paying the people what we should, the people that are working there. And I don't know. Maybe you better leave it in Hawaii.
Thank you, Joaquin, for your call. I appreciate you, senor.
Adios.
Adios. I think that these are all fair points, and I think that there are things that this is what I think makes the conversation so important and so fascinating, right? Is that there are so many different perspectives, and these are all relevant, and it's an absolutely relevant question to ask. But I also, when I think about this, I always look at everything from a decolonization standpoint, right? And how is what we're talking about? How does it empower our people? And what does it do for us moving forward? And there are always questions. I feel like Miguel and I are faced with these on a daily because we work at the front line in this area, right? In this field. So it's always a challenge. Every year I go to the legislature and I ask for additional funding so that we can staff the front line and ensure that we have enough people in the right places. And even though I like to joke that, hiring Miguel as our curator was a great thing, Miguel is, as our curator levels are well below the national standard in terms of, how we pay our employees. And, and the size of the task that we have here is, it is daunting. There's so much that needs to be done that will continue to need to be addressed moving forward. Once we are successful at bringing the Hornbasso collection home, I think it really opens up the floodgates, and then it becomes a very scary thing. What does it look like receiving items from Spain, receiving items from Germany, and even though I think we are well ahead of a lot of our neighbors in terms of the maturity of our institutions, we still struggle, and it's like Palau, I think, is a great example. Palau was able to secure an agreement with Germany. Germany is very willing to return items to them, but they just don't have the physical nor the professional capacity to receive them. And so now, I know that Palau has been interested. I don't know where they're at in progress, but I know that there was interest in some of the players there that were considering, what does this look like if we start sourcing 3D models, and we can at least bring the models home so that we, worrying about if they get damaged or destroyed is a non-issue, but they can still utilize the items for education and engagement. And so I think that everywhere in the Pacific, I think people are applying these creative solutions and perspectives on how we're going to deal with these. This is not an ideal situation, but I think it's also fair to say, we should be responsible to say that it's not something that we chose for ourselves. We didn't ask to be a colony. We didn't ask to not be covered under NAGPRA. We didn't ask for these items to be dug up and displaced. But nonetheless, here we are. And so I think that even in the way that we talk about political status, it's unfair that we're considered a U.S. possession and U.S. citizens, but don't have all the same rights and privileges as other U.S. citizens or resources. But nonetheless, we're still here, and we still have to face it and do something about it. And that's one thing that I think is important whenever we have any of these conversations is, recognizing that there has been a lot of work by our predecessors, people who came before us, that were faced with the root is a very similar conundrum. And they have a very similar set of challenges and very limited resources and very limited tools to kind of get the job done. But it never stopped them from taking a swing at it. And that's one thing that I think is if we're going to focus on a legacy for Guam, I hope that that's the thing, that, our people are not good at hearing no. We don't like being told no. We don't like being told what we can or cannot do. And I think that that's a beautiful thing. For better or for worse, it's a great thing. And I'm personally proud to be, even just a small part of the effort to say, yeah, we still don't like being told no. And we still insist that we're going to figure it out. And yeah, maybe we're not, well equipped to tackle this ourselves. Maybe we're not even going to get this thing done in our lifetime or in our little stint here in the government. But, I hope that there will be maybe all of the nannies that used to come to our radical meetings. They're going to be the ones that are going to deliver the victory. Hopefully it's us. But nonetheless, I think that we cannot be complacent. When we're complacent, then the status quo becomes acceptable. And I think at some point, the status quo at the museum was very acceptable. And here we are again saying it's not. But that said, we are at the top of the hour. And unfortunately, I get a 2-hour spot instead of like a 7-hour spot, because we could do this all day. But I want to thank Dr. Michael Lujan Bivacqua, our curator at the Guam Museum, for coming in and sharing some of his time and knowledge with us. Thanks, Reese, for holding us down. And thanks to Joaquin for calling in, our one and only caller today. I appreciate you. If you didn't call in, but you were tuned in, thanks for your time and your attention. I hope you continue to have these conversations with your family. We will see you back here next week, Monday, 10 to noon. Thanks again for tuning in. And don't forget to challenge the status quo. Have a great day, everyone.
Stop.
Yeah.